They didn't hear the chair scrape first. They heard the silence. 1 second. The room was full of voices, measured, confident. Expensive voices bouncing off glass walls and polished wood. The next, it was as if someone had reached into the air and ripped the sound out. Elliot Rose stood at the head of the table, one hand resting lightly on the edge, the other clicking through slides on the screen behind him. Founder, Billionaire, the woman whose name sat on the building itself. Row Dynamics, 42 floors of steel and ambition in downtown Seattle, which puts our third quarter projection ahead of... She stopped. Her fingers curled slightly, as if they no longer trusted the table to hold her. Someone at the far end frowned. Another executive glanced down at their tablet, irritated. Elliot's lips parted, but no words came out. Her other hand rose, not dramatically, not theatrically, to her chest. A sharp breath hitched in her throat. Then her knees buckled. The chair behind her tipped over with a crack as her body folded forward and hit the floor. For a moment, no one moved. 8 people sat around the table, all of them powerful, all of them highly paid, all of them staring, as if this were a trick they hadn't been briefed on. Is this some kind of demonstration? Someone whispered. Another laughed nervously. Elliot, very funny. But Elliot Rowe didn't laugh. Her body twitched once. Then again, her face began to change color. That was when Talia Brooks dropped her cart. The mop bucket tipped, water spilling across the marble floor outside the boardroom doors. The sound snapped her out of the daze she'd been in. Counting tiles, planning dinner, thinking about whether the bus would be late again. She looked up, through the glass walls. She saw a body on the floor, and people standing around it doing nothing. Oh no, she breathed. She didn't think. She didn't ask permission. She shoved the door open and ran. Gasps rippled to the room as a janitor, short, dark-skinned, hair pulled back under a plain blue cap, burst into the most powerful space in the building. "Hey, you can't be in here," a man barked. Talia ignored him. She dropped to her knees beside the woman on the floor. Elliot Rowe's eyes were half open but unfocused. Her chest wasn't moving. Talia pressed 2 fingers to her neck. Nothing. Her heart slammed against her ribs. "She's not breathing," Talia said, her voice louder than she felt. "Call 911. Now." Someone fumbled for their phone. Another executive stepped back, face pale. "Security! Where the hell is security?" Talia tilted Elliot's head back, just like she'd been taught. She had taken the CPR class at a community clinic 2 years ago. Not because she wanted to, because they offered grocery vouchers if you completed it. She remembered the instructor's voice. Calm, firm. If they're not breathing, you breathe for them. Talia pinched Elliot's nose. "Lean down." "She's kissing her," someone shouted. Talia didn't hear them. She sealed her mouth over Elliot's and blew. Once. Twice. "Get her off," a voice snarled. "That's inappropriate." Talia pulled back, locked her hands together, and began compressions. 1, 2, 3. Her arms shook almost immediately. Elliot was taller than her. Heavier. "Stop," someone yelled. "You don't know what you're doing." "I do," Talia said through clenched teeth. "I'm trained." A sharp pain exploded across her shoulder. Someone had struck her. She gasped but didn't stop. 4, 5, 6. Another hit, this time against her back. "Filthy," a woman hissed, touching her like that. Talia tasted blood where she'd bitten her tongue. 7, 8, 9. She leaned down again. 2 breaths, then back to compressions. Her vision blurred. Sweat ran down her temples. Her arms screamed. "Please," she whispered, her voice shaking now. "Please don't die." 23, 24. Someone grabbed her arm and tried to pull her away. She jerked free with a strength she didn't know she had. 25, 26. Then Elliot's chest jerked violently. Talia froze. Elliot coughed. Once. Twice. Air rushed into her lungs with a wet, desperate sound. The room exploded. "Oh my God!" "She's breathing." Executives surged forward all at once, stepping over chairs, shouting Elliot's name. Talia sat back on her heels, trembling. Her arms felt like rubber. Her back burned where she'd been hit. But Elliot Rowe was alive. Paramedics burst through the door moments later, pushing everyone aside with practiced efficiency. Oxygen mask, heart monitor, stretcher. One of them glanced around. Who started CPR? Talia raised her hand weakly. I did. Before the medic could say anything, a tall woman in a tailored gray suit stepped forward, her jaw tight. Name, she demanded. Talia Brooks. Talia said, standing slowly. I work maintenance. Night shift. The woman's eyes flicked over her uniform like it was something unpleasant. You will leave the building immediately, she said coldly. HR will contact you. But, Talia started. She wasn't breathing. That will be reviewed, the woman snapped. Security footage exists. Talia looked around the room. Not one person met her eyes. Not one person said thank you. She walked back out alone. The mop bucket was still tipped over. Water spread across the floor like nothing had happened. She righted it with shaking hands and pushed it down the hall. The service elevator felt smaller than usual. That night, the bus ride home was quiet. Seattle rain streaked the windows as Talia stared out, replaying the moment Elliot's chest had moved under her hands. Her daughter, Micah, met her at the apartment door barefoot and half asleep. You're late, Micah mumbled. I know, Talia said softly, kissing her head. Long night. Later, lying awake on her thin mattress, Talia traced a bruise forming on her shoulder. She had saved a life, and somehow she knew, deep in her bones, that the world was about to punish her for it. The first thing Talia Brooks noticed the next morning was the quiet, not the peaceful kind, the kind that presses against your ears until it feels wrong. Usually, by 6 a.m., the apartment building was alive with noise. Someone arguing 2 floors down. A baby crying through thin walls. Mrs. Hernandez coughing on her balcony while she watered plants that never quite bloomed. But that morning it was silent. Talia sat up slowly on the edge of her mattress, her shoulders screaming in protest. The bruise from the night before had darkened to a deep purple, spreading like ink beneath her skin. She pressed her fingers against it and sucked in a breath. Micah was still asleep on the pull-out couch, her small chest rising and falling steadily, one arm flung over a threadbare pillow. Talia watched her for a moment, grounding herself in the sight. Alive, warm, safe. That was all that mattered. Her phone buzzed on the floor beside the mattress. She picked it up, squinting. Unknown number. Her stomach tightened. Hello, she said cautiously. Talia Brooks? A woman's voice. Crisp, professional. Yes. This is Human Resources from Row Dynamics. We're calling to inform you that your employment has been terminated effective immediately. The words landed flat, like they'd been dropped into a void. I'm sorry, what? Talia said. There was an incident last night involving inappropriate conduct toward executive staff, the woman continued. Tone rehearsed. Security footage is under review. You are not to return to the premises. Inappropriate. Talia's voice cracked. She wasn't breathing. I did CPR. Our decision is final, the woman replied. You'll receive your final paycheck by mail. The line went dead. Talia stared at the phone long after the screen went dark. Micah stirred. Mama, she murmured. You okay? Talia forced her voice steady. Yeah, baby. Just wake up. We're going to have breakfast. Breakfast was toast and peanut butter. No eggs today. She smiled anyway, laughed at Micah's jokes, braided her hair with careful hands. But inside, something hollowed out. She walked Micah to school like she always did, holding her hand tight at the crosswalk. The city moved around them, uncaring. People in coats and headphones hurried past, unaware that a life had tilted off its axis. When Micah ran through the school doors and waved, Talia waved back until her arm hurt. Then she stood there alone. Her phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't HR. It was a message from Jamal, another night shift cleaner. Jamal, you see this? A screenshot followed. It was blurry, grainy, a still pulled from a security camera. Her, kneeling over Elliott Row, their faces close. A caption beneath it read, Janitor crosses line with unconscious EO. Her heart dropped into her stomach. Another message came through. Jamal, PPL saying wild stuff. You okay? Before she could respond, the phone vibrated again. And again. Group chats she barely remembered being in. People she hadn't spoken to in years. Is this you? That's disgusting. She should be arrested. You can't just touch people like that. Talia's hands went cold. She sat down on the bus stop bench hard enough that it rattled. Across the street, a digital billboard flickered to life. Elliot Rowe's face filled the screen. Confident, smiling, powerful. The slogan beneath her image read, "Leadership you can trust." Talia laughed, a short, broken sound. She rode the bus home with her forehead pressed to the window, the city blurring into gray streaks. When she reached the apartment, her neighbor, Mrs. Hernandez, was in the hallway, keys in hand. She stopped short when she saw Talia. "Oh," she said, "I saw you on my niece's phone." Talia's throat tightened. What did she say? Mrs. Hernandez hesitated. People talk too much. That was answer enough. Inside the apartment, Talia sat at the small kitchen table and stared at the wall. The silence pressed in again. Her phone buzzed. Another unknown number. She let it ring. Then another message arrived, this one from someone she didn't recognize at all. Anonymous. "We all saw what you did. You think you deserve praise?" She turned the phone face down. By afternoon, the story had grown legs. Blogs picked it up first, then local news accounts. The language shifted subtly, dangerously. Life-saving CPR became unauthorized contact. Rescue breaths became a kiss. A poor maintenance worker became a threat. When Micah came home from school, she was quieter than usual. "Someone asked me if my mom was famous," she said, kicking off her shoes. Talia froze. "What did you say?" "I said you clean buildings," Micah replied. "That's not famous." Talia smiled tightly. "That's right." After Micah went to bed, Talia finally opened her phone again. A video had surfaced, not the full footage, just a clip, edited. It cut out the part where Elliot collapsed, cut out the minutes of compressions. It showed only the moment Talia leaned down. The comments were brutal. She threw the phone onto the couch and buried her face in her hands. She had saved a life. And somehow, that truth had been twisted into something dirty. Hours later, miles away, Elliot Rowe woke up gasping. Her heart hammered as she sat upright in her hospital bed, monitors beeping frantically until a nurse rushed in to calm them. "It's okay," the nurse said gently. "You're safe." Elliot pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing. The dream clung to her. Darkness, pressure, a voice, low, urgent, steady, counting. She remembered hands on her chest. Pain, then air. "Who?" Elliot croaked. "Who helped me?" The nurse smiled. "You were very lucky. Someone started CPR almost immediately." "Who?" Elliot repeated. The nurse hesitated. "Your executives will fill you in." But when Elliot asked again later, when the doctors left, when the room was quiet, she got the same vague answers. "It's been handled. Legal is reviewing it. Best not to worry." That didn't sit right. Elliot had built her empire on details, on control, on knowing exactly what happened and why. Someone had touched her chest, pressed their mouth to hers, brought her back from death, and no one would tell her who. That night, alone in the hospital room, Elliot opened her laptop and accessed the internal security archive. She found the footage herself. She watched the collapse, the hesitation, the panic. She watched the room full of leaders freeze. And then she watched a woman in a blue maintenance uniform burst through the doors and drop to her knees without a second's pause. Elliot leaned forward as the video played. She saw the blows land on the woman's back, saw hands try to pull her away, saw the woman keep going anyway. And then breath, life. Elliot closed the laptop slowly. Her chest tightened, not from pain, but from something sharper. They'd punished the only person who acted. She reached for her phone. "Find her," she said when her chief of security answered. "The woman who saved my life." There was a pause. "She was terminated this morning." Elliot's jaw clenched. "Find her anyway," she said, "before it's too late." Talia Brooks stopped answering the phone on the third day, not because the calls stopped, but because they didn't. Her name had slipped loose into the city, carried on screens and whispers and captions that never bothered to ask whether the story was true. It didn't matter anymore. Truth moved slower than outrage, and outrage moved at the speed of a thumb flicking upward. She spent the morning walking, not with purpose, not with a plan, just moving so she wouldn't collapse in the middle of her living room. Every job posting she'd circled in the newspaper led to the same end. A polite smile that faded the moment someone recognized a name. A "we'll call you" that never came. A door that closed too softly to slam, but just as final. At a small cleaning agency near the waterfront, the manager barely glanced at her resume. "You worked at Row Dynamics," he said, tapping the paper once. "I heard about that situation." "I saved her life," Talia said. He sighed. "I can't afford drama." Drama. The word stuck to her like gum on concrete. She left without arguing. There was no energy left for it. That afternoon, she sat on the edge of the bathtub and counted the tiles while Micah did homework at the kitchen table. Counting helped. It kept her from spiraling. The power flickered once. Then again, the lights went out. Micah looked up. "Mama?" "It's okay," Talia said quickly. "Just a breaker." But she knew it wasn't. She checked the mailbox later. A pink slip waited inside. Final notice. She folded it carefully and slid it into her pocket. That night, after Micah fell asleep, Talia sat on the floor with her back against the couch and finally let herself cry. Quietly, carefully. The kind of crying that doesn't make noise because noise might wake a child. Across the city, Elliott Road didn't sleep. The image of the footage replayed in her mind again and again. The woman's hands, shaking but steady. The way she kept counting even as she was struck. Elliott had faced hostile takeovers, lawsuits, boardroom betrayals. None of it had shaken her like this. "Where is she?" Elliott asked the next morning as her head of security stood beside her hospital bed. "South End," he replied. "Single parent. Maintenance worker. No prior incidents." "What about now?" Elliott asked. "She's struggling." Elliott closed her eyes. She had been dying on a boardroom floor, while someone who made barely enough to survive chose to save her. And the system Elliott had built had repaid that with cruelty. "Get me her address," Elliott said, "and don't send a driver." The security chief blinked. "Ma'am." "I said don't send a driver." Elliott signed herself out of the hospital that afternoon. The car felt strange in her hands. She hadn't driven herself in years. Traffic lights, potholes, people crossing without looking. It all felt closer, louder, more real. The South End looked nothing like the skyline views from her office. Paint peeled. Windows were boarded. A corner store advertised payday loans in neon letters. Elliott parked in front of a brick building with a sagging awning and climbed the stairs. She knocked. No answer. She knocked again, harder. The door opened a crack. Micah stared up at her, eyes wide. "You're on the billboard," Micah whispered. Elliott swallowed. "Is your mom home?" Micah hesitated, then nodded and stepped aside. The apartment smelled like stale coffee and damp carpet. Talia lay on the couch, a blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her skin was flushed, her breathing shallow. "Talia," Elliott said softly. No response. Elliott crossed the room in 3 steps and pressed her fingers to Talia's neck. Pulse. Weak. Too fast. "Call an ambulance," Elliott said sharply to Micah, already pulling her phone out. As the sirens approached, Elliott knelt on the floor beside the couch, holding Talia's hand. "You saved my life," she whispered. "Don't you dare leave me now." The sirens didn't wail. As the ambulance pulled up, they flashed quietly, lights bouncing off wet pavement like something ashamed to draw attention to itself. Elliott rode in the back, seated on a narrow bench, her knees nearly touching the gurney where Talia Brooks lay unconscious. A clear oxygen tube rested beneath Talia's nose, and 4 lines disappeared into her arm. "Severe dehydration," one of the paramedics muttered while checking the monitor. "Malnutrition. Fever's high." Elliott's jaw tightened. "How long would it take someone to get like this?" she asked. The medic glanced at her, recognition flickering across his face. "Depends how hard life's been hitting them." The ambulance rocked as it turned a corner. Elliott reached out and carefully took Talia's hand. It was hot, trembling faintly, like a wire pulled too tight. "You brought me back," Elliot said quietly, as if Talia could hear her. "I won't let them erase you." At the hospital, everything moved fast. Doctors, nurses, forms that Elliot signed without reading. She made one phone call. "I need a private room," she said, "and I need my legal team here tonight." When the doctor finally came out, Elliot stood so fast her chair skidded backward. "She'll live," the doctor said, "but she's been pushed to the edge. Stress-induced collapse. She needs rest, nutrition, and stability." Stability. The word echoed. Elliot nodded. "She'll have it." Hours later, Talia woke to soft beeping and white light. Her throat burned. She tried to sit up. "Easy," a voice said. She turned her head. Elliot Rose sat beside her bed. Talia's eyes widened. Panic flashed. "No," she rasped. I didn't. "You saved me," Elliot said. "I saw the footage. All of it." Talia's breath hitched. Tears spilled before she could stop them. "They fired me," she whispered. "They said I did something wrong." "They lied," Elliot said simply, "and I let it happen." Talia turned her face toward the wall. "I don't want money," she said hoarsely. "I just want my kid to be okay." Elliot leaned forward. "Then let me make this right." Talia didn't trust kindness anymore. It had a way of showing up late, wrapped in apologies, carrying conditions it never admitted to. So when Elliot Rose said, "Let me make this right," Talia didn't nod. She didn't cry harder. She didn't reach out. She stared at the ceiling and waited for the catch. The hospital room was quiet except for the rhythmic beep of the monitor. Outside the window, the city glowed like it always did. Indifferent, brilliant, unreachable. "My daughter?" Talia asked finally, her voice thin. "Where's Micah?" "With my assistant." Elliot said immediately, "She's safe. Federal doing homework at a table bigger than my first office desk." Talia closed her eyes. Relief hit her, so hard it hurt. "I didn't know," Elliot continued softly. "Not until I watched the footage. Not until I saw how they treated you. That's on me." Talia turned her head, eyes sharp despite the exhaustion. "You built that place." "Yes," Elliot said, "and I failed inside it." Silence stretched between them. Then Talia asked a question that had been burning in her chest since the boardroom floor. "Why now?" Elliot didn't answer immediately. "Because power is a lie we tell ourselves," she said finally. "I thought I had it. Turns out I was just insulated from the damage." Talia swallowed. "I don't want to be your story," she said. "I don't want to be the poor woman you saved so you can feel better." Elliot nodded. "Then don't be." The next day, Talia's hospital room filled with people, but not the kind she feared. A social worker, a nutritionist, a quiet woman who introduced herself as Micah's temporary guardian advocate. No cameras, no press. Elliot stayed out of the way, present but not looming. When Micah finally came in, she ran straight to the bed and climbed up carefully, hugging her mother around the neck. "You scared me," Micah whispered. "I know," Talia said, her voice breaking. "I'm here." That night, Elliot sat alone in her penthouse for the first time since the collapse and felt something she hadn't allowed herself in years. Shame. She opened her laptop and began undoing damage. Terminations reversed. NDAs voided. Executives summoned. The woman who had ordered Talia removed from the building was escorted out by security before noon. And that was just the beginning. Talia was discharged 3 days later. Not because she was fully healed. Her body still felt like it had been wrung out and left to dry, but because hospitals were built for emergencies, not rebuilding lives. Still, when she stepped outside, wrapped in a borrowed coat and holding Micah's hand, it felt like crossing a border she hadn't known existed. A black sedan waited at the curb. Talia stopped short. "I can take the bus," she said automatically. Elliot shook her head. "Not today." The ride was quiet, not awkward, intentional. Micah pressed her face to the window, counting bridges. Talia watched the city pass, half expecting it to vanish like a dream. They didn't go back to the apartment. They went somewhere else. A small townhouse near a park. Clean, warm, lights already on. Talia stood frozen at the doorway. "I can't afford this," she said. You're not being billed, Elliot replied. And you're not being bought. Talia looked at her then, really looked. Not the woman from the billboard, not the billionaire. Just someone standing there, waiting, that night. After Micah fell asleep in a real bed with clean sheets, Talia sat at the kitchen table across from Elliot. Say it, Talia said. Say what? What you want from me. Elliot didn't flinch. Nothing. That's not how this works. Elliot exhaled slowly. I want you to help me fix something I broke. Talia laughed, sharp and humorless. You didn't break it alone. No, Elliot agreed, but I benefited from it. The next morning, the news broke. Row Dynamics CEO admits failure in CPR incident. Janitor cleared of all wrongdoing. The video was released in full, unedited. The blows, the shouting, the counting, the truth. The internet turned on itself. Apologies replaced insults. Outrage shifted direction. But Talia didn't celebrate. She watched quietly as Elliot stood behind a podium and said her name out loud, clearly, without hesitation. Talia Brooks saved my life, and my company failed her. That afternoon, Elliot made another offer. Not money, a position. Director of Internal Response and Safety, newly created. Talia stared at the document for a long time. You know they'll hate this, she said. Yes, Elliot replied. You know they'll try to destroy me. Yes. Talia folded the paper. Then I'll do it, she said. But not for you. Elliot smiled faintly. For who? For the people who don't get believed. The first rule Talia Brooks set on her first day wasn't written on a whiteboard or tucked into a policy memo. It was spoken quietly, in a conference room that still smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh paint. No one enters this room invisible. There were 12 people seated around the table. Maintenance workers, security guards, junior analysts, a cafeteria supervisor, people who, until that week, had never been invited to anything labeled strategy. Some sat stiffly, hands folded. Others looked like they might bolt at any second. Talia stood at the front, hands steady, shoulders squared, not because she wasn't afraid, but because she was done letting fear decide her posture. This department isn't about optics, she said. It's about response. When something goes wrong, we act. When someone's hurt, we listen. When power freezes, we move. A man named Victor, night security, raised his hand halfway. What, they don't let us? Talia met his eyes. Then we document it, and we escalate, and we don't stop. By noon, complaints started coming in, not dramatic ones, not lawsuits, quiet truths. A cleaner who'd been shoved out of an elevator. A receptionist told to smile more after reporting harassment. A contractor injured and pressured not to file a report. Talia listened, wrote, asked follow-up questions. Word spread fast. By the end of the week, she had a stack of incident reports taller than her coffee mug, and enemies she'd never met. Across town, former executives gathered in private offices and dim restaurants, their outrage thick with disbelief. They handed it to Janitor. One man scoffed. She's going to dig up everything, another muttered. They weren't wrong. What Talia didn't expect was the first threat. It came in an email. No sender name. No subject line. Stay in your lane. She deleted it. The second came as a note slipped under the townhouse door. You don't belong here. Micah found it. Why would someone write that? She asked. Talia folded the paper carefully and threw it away. Because change makes people loud, she said, and scared. But that night, after Micah fell asleep, Talia sat in the dark and felt the weight settle in. This wasn't just about fairness anymore. This was about survival. The first Rayall warning didn't arrive with sirens or shouting. It arrived as a spreadsheet. Talia noticed it late on a Tuesday evening, when the building had quieted into that hollow, after-hours stillness she knew too well. Most people were gone. The cleaning crews were clocking in downstairs. Her office lights cast long reflections across the glass walls, turning her into a double. One version of herself seated at the desk, another hovering just behind, watchful. She had been reviewing routine expense reports tied to the new Internal Response and Safety Department, training materials, emergency equipment, counseling hours. Nothing dramatic. Then she saw a line item that didn't belong. It wasn't large. That was the first red flag. Large thefts were allowed. This one was quiet, buried under a category labeled Contingency Wellness Allocation. The vendor name meant nothing to her. The address field was incomplete. Talia leaned closer to the screen. She pulled up the access log. Her stomach tightened. The changes had been approved using credentials that should have been dead. Archived accounts from the previous administration. Old digital fingerprints that should no longer exist. She saved the file to an encrypted drive and leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a moment. This wasn't petty retaliation. This was sabotage. A knock sounded at her door. Talia opened her eyes. "Come in," she said calmly. Carmen Reyes stepped inside, clutching a tablet to her chest like a shield. Peril. Sharp. Quiet. The kind of person people underestimated until it was too late. "You seeing it too?" Carmen asked softly. Talia nodded once. "They're routing funds through shell vendors," Carmen continued. "Small amounts. Spread out. They think no one will notice." "Who else knows?" Talia asked. "Just you," Carmen said. "And now me." "Good," Talia replied. "Let's keep it that way." They worked until nearly midnight, cross-referencing invoices, tracing digital pathways, pulling records that had been buried under layers of corporate dust. Each discovery tightened the knot in Talia's chest. This wasn't just about money. It was about making her department look corrupt, about destroying credibility before it had time to root. At home, the warning arrived in a different form. Talia unlocked the townhouse door the next evening and felt it immediately. Something was off. Not stolen. Not ransacked. Touched. The curtains in the living room were slightly open. The hallway light, left off that morning, was on. Her pulse spiked. "Talia?" Micah called from her room. "Grandma's here." Talia exhaled shakily and stepped inside. Elena Brooks sat at the kitchen table, her cane resting against her chair. She looked up, concern etched deep into her face. Someone came by. Elena said. Talia's heart slammed. "Who?" "Didn't see them," Elena replied, "but this was on the fridge." Talia turned. A printed copy of her employee badge photo was taped to the refrigerator door. Across it, in red marker, was one word: "Quit." Talia stared at it for a long time. Then she peeled it off, folded it once, and dropped it into the trash. She didn't scream, didn't cry. She walked into Micah's room, knelt, and wrapped her arms around her daughter. "You okay?" Micah asked. "Yes." Talia said, "Meaning I will be. I'm right here." "That night," she called Elliot. "They crossed the line," Talia said evenly. "Someone came into my home." Elliot's voice hardened instantly. "I'm sending security." "No," Talia said. "Not just security." A pause. "You want to go public," Elliot said. "I want daylight," Talia replied. "If they're going to fight, they don't get shadows." The emergency meeting was scheduled for Monday morning. All hands. No exceptions. By the time employees filled the auditorium, maintenance workers in uniform sitting beside junior analysts in press jackets, the air vibrated with tension. Rumors had already spread. Talia stood backstage, smoothing the front of her blazer, her heartbeat steady but heavy. "You don't have to do this," Elliot said quietly beside her. "Yes," Talia replied. "I do." When the curtain opened, the room fell silent. Elliot spoke first. "This company has failed before," she said. "Today, we choose whether it keeps failing." Then she stepped aside. Talia walked to the center of the stage. "My name is Talia Brooks," she said, "and I need to tell you the truth." The screen behind her lit up. Numbers, charts, transactions. "For weeks," Talia continued, "someone inside this company has been stealing money under cover of employee wellness. Quietly, carefully, hoping no one would notice." Murmurs rippled through the room. "This wasn't a mistake," she said. "It was intentional." A man in the third row stood abruptly. "This is absurd." Talia met his gaze. "So, is thinking you wouldn't be caught." Security moved. Within minutes, one of the shell vendors was identified, detained, and escorted out. Applause broke out, not thunderous, but real afterward. As employees filtered out buzzing with shock and relief, Talia sat alone on the edge of the stage. Her hands finally shook. She had crossed the point of no return, and she knew, deep down, that this was only the beginning. The fallout didn't arrive all at once. It arrived in waves. The first wave was internal: audits, interviews, emergency policy freezes. Offices that once hummed with quiet arrogance now buzzed with fear. People checked over their shoulders, deleted emails, reread old decisions through new eyes. The second wave came from outside. The press didn't knock politely. They crashed. Headlines exploded across screens before Talia had finished her first cup of coffee. Whistleblower exposes internal fraud at Road Dynamics. From janitor to executive, the woman disrupting power. Hero reliability. Corporate giant under fire. Cameras appear at the end of the street. Reporters waited near Micah's school. That was the moment Talia felt real fear, not for herself, but for her child. "This stops," she told Elliot flatly. "Now." Elliot made the calls personally. Private security. School protection. No press within 2 blocks. Still, the noise crept in through screens. Anonymous messages flooded Talia's inbox. "You should have stayed quiet. You don't know who you're messing with. We know where your kid goes." That one. She forwarded straight to federal investigators. By Thursday, the FBI was involved. And by Friday, Congress was calling. The letter arrived in a thick envelope, formal and heavy. Invitation to testify. Committee on Corporate Ethics and Labor Safety. Talia stared at it for a long time. Elliot didn't try to convince her. "I'll support whatever you decide," she said. That night, Talia lay beside Micah, listening to her breathe. "Mom," Micah whispered, "are you in trouble?" Talia swallowed. "I'm telling the truth." Micah considered this. That's usually when people get mad. Talia smiled sadly. "Yeah, it is." She accepted the invitation. Washington felt colder than Seattle, even indoors. The building was all stone and echoes. History hanging heavy in the air like judgment. Talia sat at the witness table, hands folded, spine straight. Cameras rolled. "Ms. Brooks," a congressman began. "Why are you here?" Talia didn't hesitate. Because silence protects the wrong people. They asked about the fraud, the retaliation, the culture that let it grow. Then came the question meant to unbalance her. "Some say you're leveraging this moment for personal gain." Talia leaned forward. "I didn't ask for a platform," she said. "I asked for fairness. Everything after that happened because people tried to take my voice away." The room went quiet. When the hearing ended, Talia stepped outside into gray light and felt something shift. Not victory, not relief, resolve. Back home, as weeks passed, the threats faded. So did the headlines. What remained was the work. The systems changed. The doors opened. People spoke. And slowly, something new began to take shape. The city didn't throw Talia Brooks a parade. There were no banners stretched between buildings, no confetti falling from balconies, no polished speeches declaring a new era. Change, she learned, rarely arrived dressed like celebration. It arrived quietly, in emails rewritten with different language, in doors that stayed open a second longer, in voices that stopped lowering themselves out of habit. 3 months after the congressional testimony, Talia stood in the lobby of Road Dynamics at 7 a.m., coffee cooling in her hand, watching the building wake up. She remembered the first time she'd stood there. Back then, she'd worn gloves, pushed a cart, kept her eyes down. Now, people nodded when they passed her. Some smiled. Some still looked uncomfortable. But no one pretended she wasn't there. That mattered. Her department had grown faster than anyone predicted. What started as internal response and safety had become something broader, human accountability and care. The name had been Elliot's idea, but the structure was Talia's. Independent reporting lines, anonymous escalation paths, paid emergency leave, a rapid response team trained not just in protocol, but in compassion. No slogans, no glossy posters, just systems that worked. That morning, a young man named Theo waited outside her office, twisting the strap of his backpack between his fingers. "Come in," Talia said gently. He sat nervous. "I work facilities," he said. "Night shift. I didn't know who else to talk to." Talia listened, just like she always did. Later, she ate lunch on the rooftop with Elliot. The skyline stretched out before them, glass and gray in endless movement. "I almost lost everything," Elliot said quietly. "Not the company. The illusion." Talia smiled faintly. "Those are harder to rebuild." Elliot nodded. "You never asked me for credit." "I didn't need it," Talia replied. "I needed leverage." Elliot laughed softly. "You used it well." That evening, Talia walked Micah home from school, their shadows stretching long across the sidewalk. "Mom," Micah said suddenly, "are you famous now?" Talia considered this. "No," she said. "I'm useful." Micah nodded, satisfied. At home, Elena watched them from the kitchen, pride softening the lines in her face. "You didn't bend," Elena said later, handing Talia a mug of tea. "I almost did," Talia admitted. "But you didn't," Elena replied. "That's the part that counts." Weeks later, the final case closed. The last executive involved in the fraud accepted a plea deal. The system, once quiet, once protected, had cracked open under light. One afternoon, Elliot handed Talia a small package. Inside was a plaque. Not grand, not flashy. It read, "Talia Brooks, because doing the right thing should never cost everything." Talia ran her thumb over the engraving. "I don't want to be remembered as an exception," she said. Elliot met her gaze. "Then you won't be." Years from now, when Micah would be old enough to understand the full story, she would ask why her mother didn't walk away when she had the chance. And Talia would tell her the truth. Because someone had to stay. Because courage doesn't always look like bravery. Sometimes it looks like refusing to disappear.